Are you researching your ancestors using just the federal census records? If so, you could be missing part of their story. State census records can reveal details about your ancestors' household between the federal census years, giving you extra data that sheds light on your ancestor story. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how state records can and should be a part of your genealogy research too. Now I want to thank archives.com for sponsoring today's video. Whether you are a beginner or a seasoned researcher, Archives offers everything you need to get started on your genealogy journey. They provide a diverse range of census, vital, immigration, and military records, and serve as more than just a database, but as a partner in your genealogy discoveries. Users can easily attach records using the Family Tree Builder and find new details about their ancestors using the Discovery Engine. Now, with users of all skill levels in mind, Archives.com ensures affordability for everyone. They offer a more focused collection at a lower price point, with many users discovering unique record sets not found elsewhere. So if you're ready to dig a little deeper and find search tips as well, you'll want to check out their help page on specific record collections in their blog. So get ready and start your journey with Archives today and uncover the stories that will connect to your past. I'll have the link for them in the description below. Now, I know some of you are researching ancestors outside of the United States, but keep watching because similar records do exist for other countries, and it's possible you'll find a regional census similar to our state census here in the United States within the country you're researching. Now let's take a step back for just a moment and think about why state census records matter to your research. Now, not every state actually took a census in between the federal census records. So first off, you'll need to find out if the state that you're researching in actually did take a state census. I'll have a list of those down in the description below. Now, the federal census record here in the United States was taken every 10 years, beginning in the year of 1790. So that means that as genealogy researchers, we can track our ancestors every 10 years through the records, with the exception of that 1890 census, which unfortunately is no longer available for us to use. Now, for those states who took a state census, these records actually serve a vital role in placing your ancestor in a very specific time and place in those in-between years from when the federal census was taken. Oftentimes, those that did this would take it in a year that ended in a 5. Not always the case, but typically they would take a state census on the years that ended in 5. But you will find exceptions to that rule. For instance, New York has a state census for 1892. Now, similar to how you would use a federal census record in your genealogy research, you're going to do the same thing with that state census record. You can track migration or movement patterns within the U.S. You can locate and track their extended family members. You can document property ownership. In some cases, you can find religious affiliation mentioned, as well as even health information that is listed. So each state had a unique approach, and they asked questions according to their own purposes and needs. So let's take a look at some examples of these state census records. I'm going to turn the camera around and let's just get into them and look at the records themselves. Here's an example of the 1892 New York State Census record. And what you'll see here is there's not a ton of information about your ancestor, but there's still lots of really cool information that you can pick up. And again, this is that in-between time period, in between a federal census record being taken. And so that's the value of a state census record. Now, one of the really nice things for those states that took a state census around the 1890, and particularly here, this 1892 state census record, for those of you researching New York ancestors, is the fact that because we don't have the 1890 federal census to research, this is a close approximation. So this is a very helpful way of perhaps finding your ancestor in that time and place that sometimes we like to refer to as the black hole of census research. So let's take a little close up here that we can look at. One of the first things you're going to notice is that there are 2 columns of names per page. So here we have names here, and then of course it's 2 pages. So you've got a lot of people on just these 2 pages of census records. I'm going to enlarge this a bit. Again, grabbing your important information from up top about when it was taken. And this one actually you can't really quite see here, but it looks like the enumeration date was February 16th, and we're going to think most likely 92. Let's check it on the other side. Yes, February 16th, 1892. So that gives us the census date that this was taken. So you can see here we have the names we have the gender, we have the age of the individual. They come over here and tell us what country they are from, their citizen, as well as their occupation. So this gives us a very brief snapshot of our ancestor in, say, 1892. Show you what the 1915 New York Census record looks like for this example. Now, again, I'm actually looking at one of my husband's ancestors. His name was Lisa Lisson, and we will find Israel's family right down here at the bottom. Let me pull that up a little bit more. At the bottom here. So this is very simple. It's actually less information, though, than what I would get perhaps on a federal census record for this time period, say 1910 or 1920. But this gives me a really nice midway point to get an idea of what does the family look like in 1915, who's living where, and it gives me that example that I can look at. So the first thing I do when I have a census record, I'm going to go back up here to the top, and I'm going to look. Let's look at this top information. And this is not across a 2-page ledger. This is 1 page on the left and 1 page on the right. So I'm going to look at this. We're looking at which block number. We have an election district. We have a ward number. We're in Rochester, New York. So this is a great thing. I'm in page 18 on the census record, and I know who the enumerator was. Now, when you look at this, this is enumeration of the inhabitants. It gives us all of this information, Monroe County, state of New York, effective June 1st, 1915, because it took the census taker a little time to get from door to door, right? So this is information that was in effect or appropriate for June 1st, 1915. So the other thing that I'm reading, I will review the headings up here as well. So it gives me their permanent address, their name of each person, and their usual place of abode or where they were usually living in June 1st, 1915, relation to the head of the household. I'm getting information on their race, their gender, their age, their last birthday, where they were born. I'm getting citizenship information, so this is really quite important to know about how many years they've been in the country, and if they are actually citizens or where they are in the process, their occupation. And this last column is actually for inmates of institutions. So this gives us a little bit of information about that. So when we come back, let's come back down. We notice here on the street, so it's Chatham Street is the actual name of the street where my ancestor lived, or my husband's ancestor lived in this case. He lived at 81 Chatham Street, very consistent with what I've seen in the city directory for him. And what we're seeing is Israel, we have his wife Dora, their son Abe, Mary, and a son David. We'll look at the rest of the family in just a minute. What I noticed right away is that at this point, the older sons have moved out. So Abe is actually the third son, the third born son, not the first. So I'm noticing that the older children have actually moved out and moved on from basically their age. So that's good to know. I see that the first 3 were born in Russia, and then I can see that the others were born here in the US. Israel is not working at this point. He is 61 years old at this point in time period, and so he is actually no longer working. It makes me wonder if he could be retired, but this is not a family that typically I would have gotten that impression. But I also know that he does pass away 2 years later, so I'm wondering if he perhaps was ill. We know that he's been in the country for 28 years and that he is a citizen. This is C for citizen. We see that Dora, who was born in Russia, as well as Abe, they have both been in the country for 23 years, indicating that they came over after Israel did. So it's a nice little piece of information to store away. If I hadn't already known that, I would pick that up here as well. And again, we see what they were doing as part of their occupations. And always, as you know, when you have an ancestor at the bottom of a page, go ahead and check the top of the next page because you can find the rest of the family there. So we found the two youngest children, and it looks like they have some other folks living with them because they're all at the same house, or likely this is a tenement type, apartment type of building because you have the two families. It looks like almost 3 heads of household listed at this particular address. So you have Israel, you have a head of household, Charles Sutherland, and another one here, Max Coleman. So it does appear that we are looking at perhaps, say, a tenement or a shared home in some respect. So that's what I could pull out from this 1915 New York State Census record. So here's what we might see on a South Dakota 15 state census. Now, here it is in just the transcribed form where we have her name, Georgine Lasson. We have age, birth year, gender, race, place of birth, nationality. So it tells us her nationality, which is a right interesting piece of information. It also tells us when she arrived in the state. So that's really important because that helps us in migration. We might know where she was in 1910. We might know where she was in 1920. But to know that she actually, when that move occurred, was actually in 1914 is very helpful. She arrived in South Dakota, and she, again, we can find a little bit more information that way. So we want to click through to look at her record, and here we see it, the original record right here, and we see Georgine Lasson. Again, we see the county, we see where her post office box was, ward. She was a school teacher, so we know her occupation. We know that she did not own her home or farm. She was born in Minnesota. She was Norwegian ancestry. She has a high school education, so we get some education there. She didn't have military service, but they actually do ask for that. They ask for church affiliation. However, she did not provide any, so it's possible that she didn't actually have any or have an affiliation or just chose not to offer that. Again, we have some more of the pertinent vital information over here on the left with her gender, her race. She is single, so marital status, she can read and write. This tells us a little bit about her state, which, again, this is their terminology. You have to remember the time period that this was taken, and that she's been in South Dakota for 1 year. So very helpful to have that information and learn a little bit more about her as well. Now, we've looked at state census records, but what I wanted to share with you is a couple of the other interesting things that you might find in a state census record, depending on which state you are actually researching. So for example, in Minnesota, the 1895 state census record, you could get detailed agricultural information. You could get immigration details, and you could get religious affiliations. In the 1895 Kansas census that we mentioned, not only would you get the Civil War service information, but you can certainly get information on marriage as well as property ownership. And then in an 1885 Florida state census, you could actually learn about the health condition of your ancestor on that day of enumeration. They actually recorded if the individual was sick or if they were disabled. And additionally, you could get occupational information as well as property values. So it's quite a varied information that you can find depending on which state and which year you are researching. Now let's talk about some research strategies that you can use to get the most out of your state census research. Now, one of the first things that you're going to want to do is actually check if the state where your ancestors lived, the state that you were researching in, actually had and took a state census record, and if they did, which years. Now, you can determine this in a number of ways. You can actually check the information on the state archives site for where you're researching. You can also check with the state genealogical societies. They will oftentimes have that information there as well. And another good site to check would actually be the Family Search Wiki for that particular state. Now, once you find your ancestor in a state census, do exactly what you would do when it comes to researching them in a federal census record. Make sure you read every single column. We've talked a lot about this in previous videos. Denote all of the information. Don't just say, okay, great, they are still in New York City in 1892 and I'm off and running somewhere else. Make sure you are tracking and make note of every piece of information that is there. Some of it will be very pertinent to your current research. Some of it may come into play later, but make sure you are getting a full read of that census for them. And don't forget to check those people around them as well. And once you've gotten the information from that state census record, take a moment and think about what it's telling you as far as where they are. Is it consistent? Where were they in the federal census record previously? Where were they in the federal census afterwards? Are they where you thought they would be? Have they moved? Does this indicate the move occurred earlier than you anticipated or actually later than you might have anticipated? So this gives you an idea. This is a very helpful way to look at ancestors who are on the move. You can start to narrow down the time period perhaps when those migrations took place. Now let's take a look at a couple more tips that will improve your search results when you are looking for your ancestor in these records. And one of the things that you're going to notice here is that this works whether you are researching a state census record or a federal census record. Make sure you're searching under multiple name spellings or name variations. As we know, census records, federal or state census takers tended to have poor handwriting. And so things can be transcribed incorrectly. If you're not finding your ancestor under the spelling that you're used to seeing, make sure you are accounting for spelling variations. Just like when you're researching in the federal census, make sure you are paying attention to the county boundaries. Boundary changes that may have occurred over time may impact where you find your ancestor, which county they were actually living. And of course, I look for entire family groups if possible. And when you find your ancestor in records, read who else is on that page, who else is in close proximity to them. I actually like to read 4 to 5 pages forward and 4 to 5 pages backwards. That way I can improve my chances of finding collateral relatives that may play into my research as well. Plus, by reading that many census pages, it helps me recognize and understand who was in the community and the makeup of the community. Now learn more about getting the most out of your census research in this video on your screen now. Census records, the missing piece to your family's puzzle.